Hello and welcome to the second installment of the Headphone Dialogue. I am your host Ofenlicht, and joining me today are Metal571, Mad Economist, and a very special guest, Lachlan from Lachlanlikesathing. Well, let's move on to the flagships that are priced even higher than the HD820. We have an influx of headphones that are far into the 4-digit numbers, with ranging around $4,000 with the Focal Utopia, the LCD 4 from Odyssey, and you can maybe count the Abyss to it as well. I don't know for sure. It's kind of an oddball headphone, but we do have even more expensive headphones out there that are definitely flagship pieces with the two examples, the LCD 4. Although
I think the SR09S at current exchange rates is also about there.
True, that one as well. And you do need an electrostatic amp for that one additionally, so that's an even bigger investment if you don't have one already. So if we take those three headphones, what do you guys think of those? Just real quick, starting if you've heard them, starting with Metal maybe.
I can't speak for the 009S. I'm not sure how different that is from the regular 009, though I have heard the original 009, so I can talk about that briefly. So that headphone definitely kind of redefined treble detail for me, and I kind of tend to use the term E-stat-like treble now to refer to the way the 009 represents treble. It's really clean and fast, and that's basically defines what fast is. So despite costing is it still $5,000, the 009S, around there? I don't know if that's,
I think it depends a lot on the exchange rate. I think that it was intended to be around there, but
it fluctuates
a bit. I think it's like 3,700 right now.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, considering that that's the flagship, I guess you could say, actually, I think it is officially kind of the marketed also as the flagship of Stax. I think it solidifies its place pretty well. But again, like often said, you have to have an energizer for that. You can't just plug into a standard amplifier. So that it adds a little bit more expense, is something to think about. So the Odyssey LCD 4, I think a lot of people who have watched my videos are probably going to know what I'm going to say about this one. I really like that headphone. In fact, if I had to pick one open back favorite, while we were talking about favorites, that would be my personal favorite, because it combines the darker Odyssey signature quite well with, as I was saying, a quite E-stat-like sounding treble in terms of detail and quality rather than brightness. So that's my personal favorite. I've heard that headphone twice now as well. And then we have the Utopia, and did we mention the Susvara? I can't remember.
I don't think we did, but I was going to interject.
That's the other one. Yeah, I've heard those two briefly, not for an appreciable amount of time, but I will say those two, when I walked away from that setup at Can Jam, listening to the Utopia and Susvara back to back, was interesting, because I felt like it was the first time where the music, the recording quality of the music was legitimately one of the larger limiting factors of the quality that the headphone could produce, rather than a headphone technical deficiency, which was really interesting, and I never experienced that before, other than maybe the 009 is pretty close to having that quality as well. So I'll let you guys talk now about the flagships as well.
Right. How about Lachlan next?
So it was the 009. We're talking about the 009S, the Utopia, and the Susvara.
Yeah, and the LCD4.
LCD4.
And I guess if anyone here has heard it, the Abyss.
Oh yeah, but it's kind of an oddball.
And then there's the Sonoma, I would say.
Oh yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Although I have,
Oh, and the D8000. How much is that?
I think that will come out. Is that out yet? I think it's supposed to be like.
Yeah, it's out. Yeah, I've seen it in Hong Kong. I didn't have a listen foolishly, but definitely seen it in Hong Kong.
It's really interesting technically. I think it's supposed to be 3,500 or 4,000, but I'm not sure.
Right.
It's up there.
As far as the 009S, I only heard it for about 20 minutes because we arranged a special demo for a customer who wanted to compare the 009 and the 009S. I remember being impressed, but in a sense, I wasn't. As the price increases, my sort of expectation sort of goes up higher, and in that sense, I wasn't blown away in the same way that I was blown away when I first heard the L700, because for me the L700 is one of my sort of dream open backs in terms of having that really ethereal kind of floaty treble response and quite very, very fast, quite tight bass response. And the 009S, it still had those same qualities, of course, but I couldn't really put a finger on how it was dramatically different from the L700. That said, I didn't have them side by side, so maybe if I could listen to them at the same time, I would be like, okay, now I see why this one is several times the price. Is it several times the price? I don't even know anymore.
Compared to L700?
Yeah.
I think the L700 is around $1,200. Not completely sure, like around there, like a little over $1,000 US.
Right. Yeah.
So-
and I find the L700 actually more comfortable for me because I wear glasses, and I found that when you have the narrower the headphone is in sort of width, the better it works for my glasses in general. So that was my take on the 009S. As far as the Utopia goes, I actually haven't had a long enough listen to that. It's good. I suspect if I put it against the Clear, I may like the Clear more just because the treble response is a little more tamed, and I tend to prefer that. But again, I haven't had those side by side. I really should. As far as the
LCD4?
the 4Z.
Oh,
yeah. I would. Oh, I've actually only really heard the 4Z, not the 4.
Oh, that's fine. It's still kind of the same tier, right?
And I would sort of completely agree with Metal. Is apart from the L700, that's my other sort of dream headphone to own, because it's just like dark chocolate. Like it's just listening to it, just that richness of sound and the depth of kind of bass. But it has, compared to my LCD2C, it has more vibrancy in the vocals. That said, it's about 4 times the price, and I don't think of it as 4 times better.
Right.
Isn't it 5 actually?
That's about 5, yeah. It's and I'm thinking of the XC, is it?
That's the close one.
No. The other one that's like the LCD4, but it's the studio.
Oh, the MX4, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that's funny, Lachlan, you mentioned that, because you're not the only reviewer who has an LCD2C right now.
Yeah.
I'm falling for myself too.
Man, so maybe you want to talk. Have you actually heard the Hypermind flagship? Because usually you are more of a Hypermind person, so maybe you can chime in on that one.
I actually, strangely enough, haven't heard most of the flagships mentioned. I actually have never even managed to find myself with an SR09, which is something that I'm really sad about. I have spent quite a while with the Utopia, which I found to be like a really interesting headphone, actually. I don't know, I'm probably going to cut slightly against the grain here, but I found it to be a very impressive headphone to listen to. I think it's probably the headphone that when I've had other people listen to it, it's been one of the fastest to get a good impression just from everyone, from music lovers to audiophiles, normal people. But I think it's also probably the headphone that for me most distinctly highlighted how I didn't feel that price scaled to quality as much. Like I think both Metal and Lachlan have, sort of had an experience of something where the really high end thing was, very good. Metal is saying, limited by the quality of the recording. For me, I felt like, there's always some element of that, and it's definitely a fantastic headphone. It's one of the best that I've heard. But it also felt oddly to me, almost, I would put it in the same category as the HD 800, as something that's fantastically transparent. It's, extremely well balanced for the signature it's looking for. But do I think it's, more a flagship? To me, they seem, if you had given me the two of them without telling me the prices, I would have thought that either could have been the $4,000 one, except maybe for the build, where I think the focals shine a bit more.
Right. So
Which is a bit surprising to me.
So what I've generally just heard here is that flagships are headphones that we all consider to be impressive in a sense, that all show off a certain type of actually technical ability or some sort of very unique characteristic, but it doesn't mean that we necessarily prefer the flagship to maybe other headphones of the same manufacturer, which I think is very interesting. Whereas like people, or maybe the company would hope that people think the flagship headphone is the best headphone that they make, but it actually isn't the headphone that people in our subsection at least prefer. So in that sense, flagship, is it like sort of maybe in a sense their marketing just to make people think that it's actually better than the other headphones that they also make, the same manufacturer, like that they just choose arbitrarily a headphone to say, well, this is going to be our flagship and this one's going to be what we say is better than our other products?
That's well, I think Focal is a really interesting one there, because they have now several headphones that are sort of all in a similar style of voicing to the Utopia. They have the Clear, the Elex, and the Utopia. And do they have another one yet? I recall I saw one that had a different color scheme, but that might just be the Clear Pro. And I'd be really interested to see if you sat just a bunch of people down, they should all feel pretty similar on the head, and just did some preference tests, see which people really would like more. Because I think I know some people who preferred the Lex to the Utopia.
Yeah, for sure.
I sat down at one local meet recently that we had the Allure and the Clear right next to each other, actually, which was really unusual to find. I guess this guy had bought both and was trying to decide. And yeah, I agree with Mad. They are incredibly similar in the signature that they're going for. So that creates a interesting kind of almost like a paradox of choice, because you've got, now it's the Allure, the Clear, and the LX in there. And you need a lot of impressions from people, and it's very difficult to get those three in the same room to just evaluate in order to decide.
So Lachlan, in Medis, do you have like customers that come in that just want to hear the most expensive headphone of a certain company, or the most expensive headphone that you have in stock? Like,
we rarely have a customer come in and say, I want to hear the most expensive one in those specific words. They'll come in with an idea of, I want to listen to this headphone, and then generally speaking, they won't want to move too far out of that price band unless unless we sort of point out to them that there might be something a lot better either side.
right.
I generally, you do get like, and I find this with Sennheiser most of all, you do get customers who come in and they want to stay within a manufacturer, which is sort of surprising to me, I guess, in a sense. But I guess a lot of them, they come in and maybe it's their first high-end headphone, and I honestly was surprised, because this is one of the first things that I noticed working at the store, which I didn't think would be a trend, where you'd customers who were prepared to spend a great deal but weren't entirely too confident about, like, they hadn't done the same kind of like geeky sort of listening to everything. and they tend to fall back within a few manufacturers because they know their names, they know the companies, and they feel confident. And that's fair enough, because a lot of the top manufacturers also have the best sort of after sales support and that sort of thing. So they feel more confident when they buy the product that it won't have problems later on down the line or anything like that. But I've sort of forgotten the original question.
Well,
yeah. Do they come in and ask for the most? No. Generally speaking, people aren't sort of that. They'll ask for a product which is the most expensive in that line, but they won't ask for just show me whatever is the most expensive.
Well, but you do. I think it's interesting. You do mention the brand loyalty within the headphone community. It's like that people kind of find their favorite brand and stay within that brand. So, what about? I'm just going to put that theory out there. Maybe, or it's not even that outrageous of a theory. Maybe manufacturers just create new flagships these days to keep people that are loyal to their brand, to keep giving them something that they can, kind of aspire to owning, or look forward to owning something new, something more expensive, for people that are already within that brand. Maybe the reason we've seen flagships being released in recent years with increasing price tags is just that brands have found out, well, we've got all these people that are loyal to our brand, that that maybe we can create a new price bracket that is significantly higher than we previously had, which now brings us to where we are today with these new flagships, around $4,000 plus minus, depending on what you talk about.
5, 6.
5, 6, yeah, depending on which manufacturer. But is it something that why do you think we see these increasing prices in flagships? Lachlan, you can definitely give your opinion on this one as well.
Well, it's sort of funny because I think it would be naive to say that the price is not a signal by the manufacturer, and they aren't. Definitely they are creating sort of marketing or customer journeys, and I think that, again, I bring up the HD820 and that kind of ideal customer scenario where someone has the HD800 and they sort of go, okay, I want something that's closed now because I want to be able to listen to music when other people are around. Well, I would say, again, it would also be sort of too cynical to say that there aren't accompanying, whenever and obviously the market is moving up in price, there do seem to be kind of process technology or innovation, improvements, debatable to what degree, but even with the 820, you could go, there was a fair degree of research into how to create that sort of concave piece of glass and the acoustic absorber chambers and how to maintain a sense of openness in a closed headphone. But it's debatable, I guess, across manufacturers and even across headphone lines, how much of that price increase is due to that, that kind of treadmill of price increase, and how much of it is actually due to some kind of innovation. I mean, I think there are some spaces where we're seeing a lot of improvement. I would say with wireless or noise cancelling headphones, and in closed flagship headphones. I think that seems to be the new battleground for all the companies. I would say with open flagship headphones, I'm not really seeing a huge increase in sort of innovation or process technology to go along with this price increase that's still happening in that side of things. And IEMs, that's sort of like a maybe as well for me. So it's sort of interestingly patchy.
If you don't mind me just sort of interjecting with some undergrad econ here, there's an interesting effect called the Veblen effect, which I always think about when I look at how headphone prices are going these days. Basically, for most goods, as prices rise, we see people's demand drop off. But Veblen goods are those for which, when they get more expensive, they're more in demand. The usual example is expensive cars and clothing. I think it's pretty hard to argue that headphones aren't an example. There's a lot of stuff that's very expensive that's kind of in demand to some degree because it's the only thing in a price category. I think you can probably say that was true of the original SR Omega, for example. But it's interesting that sort of companies do seem to definitely try to bring something to bear along with, if people want you to raise your prices effectively, if there's more demand when you raise your prices. It's interesting to see what companies try to do with the new options that gives them. Like the A20, I think I heard they completely re-engineered the entire housings like polymer because they wanted to reduce the weight or something because they needed to add the glass. And things like that, maybe they don't necessarily quite equate to the price increase. But if you think about it from the other perspective, that from the company's perspective, it almost looks like customers want you to raise your prices. And then you have to go back to say, what does that allow us to do for them? It's sort of an interesting reframing. And I think, at least for me, it's contextualized a lot of the things that always sort of can seem a bit strange on the face of it, like going for more premium materials when nobody was complaining about them before or the like.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting perspective from somebody, obviously that is in manufacturing headphones as you are. But I do agree. I think it's customer demand that's driving prices up, and we have to consider different markets than maybe the markets that we're used to in the West, with be it Europe, be it the United States, be it Australia, or New Zealand. But there's markets in Asia that operate completely differently, especially when it comes to pricing policy. That we need to consider and companies do consider when creating new headphones. But not to cut into the discussion, Metal, what do you see happening in the future with prices and flagship headphones?
I actually have a question for Mad here. Do you think that this actually goes for all you guys, but I wanted to see what Mad would say about it from an econ perspective. Do you think that the multi-kilobuck market was essentially basically created on their own by these manufacturers, or what do you think about the history of that market? Because I know that there were some multi-kilobuck headphones in existence before, kind of like the boom that started around the HD 800. But do you think that market has kind of been essentially created and more open to the masses now?
Well, to some degree, I kind of think that if you look at how people were operating before the HD 800 came out, I kind of think that you could almost say that manufacturers just sort of realized the market was there. As said, I think I'm really strong in my opinion that a lot of high-end headphone prices are based on the Veblen effect, which again is not in any way to be a negative statement. I just think that there is a desire for a really expensive headphone that people are saying, come on and meet me with what you can deliver for this. And if you look back, before the HD 800, you see people paying for, like $400 cups on Biodynamics or something that was a thing for a while, or, very, very expensive aftermarket cable modifications. That I remember there was a fad of that, back in like maybe just after the Headwise days. So, and I mean, of course, still is, but it was more dominant in the high-end price space. So I think with the 800, with the LCD2, with the early start of the kilobuck headphones in this era, after the R10 and stuff from the 80s, we're kind of seeing manufacturers wake up to the fact that people are interested in spending this much money on headphones and try to bring what they can to the people who have to fill that slot of demand, with what they can offer. And some of them do better than others, obviously, at being attractive there. But I think that was a market that's kind of existed at least for as long as people have really wanted to spend money on headphones.
Okay, yeah, that's a good way of summarizing it. As far as my opinion goes, I can't really predict the future. It seems like we're seeing a huge amount of announcements, especially this year lately, of the kilobuck and multi-kilobuck, and it seems like there's less activity. I mean, maybe around the mass drop pricing level. There's been a lot of models there, but I don't see a whole lot, maybe between, if I had to pin it, 300 to 700 or 800 activity there, and I'd like to see more activity there in what people classically determine as mid-fi, especially new products, and that's been something that I would like to see. But it seems like the current trend is, of course, and very recently, high-end closed backs, which is pretty interesting. So I never thought that would be the direction we're going, but it seems like multi-kilobuck in general is around what's coming out right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely here to stay. I don't think we're going to go back down with prices in the flagship headphones. I don't know if we can go higher. I don't know for sure. I think it probably depends on how the market develops and what kind of innovation in headphones we get. But we do have established some pretty expensive headphones that definitely offer very, very specific qualities, and that there's a market for them. But in the same vein, a lot of them don't really hold their value that well on the aftermarket when you compare it to the MSRP, I think, which is kind of interesting. Buying a Utopia at MSRP, you kind of lose $1,500 immediately, just if you spend the $4,000 at some store. And does that indicate that there's maybe like a little bit of inflated pricing going on, or is that just with considering hygiene and headphones in general, it's just something that you would consider a normal depreciation with high-end headphones? Well, Lachlan, do you have any?
I mean, on that specific question of depreciation, I think it's pretty normal for a luxury good to depreciate very rapidly, like in the same way luxury cars sort of depreciate, because the market, in a sense, the people who are buying these things they are in a lot of senses status objects, and you're not buying secondhand status symbols, for a lot of, I'm not saying that applies for everyone, of course, but I think, yeah, they do tend to drop off rapidly in price because of that. I think in relation to the general question about the price trend of the headphone, I think there's a couple of things going on there, where you have, number one, headphones are a very emotional purchase, and I see for a lot of people there's a sort of fear of missing out, right? Literally, like I think that they go, okay, this is a $1,500 headphone, it's a $3,000 headphone. There's no way that the $1,500 headphone is as good as the $3,000. So if the manufacturer is offering tops out at $1,500, then it sort of sends the signal that they don't feel as confident about their headphones that they can put them up against that. And I think the case study again, which is sort of interesting, is the THD 820, where I think in a sense, like what Mad was saying, was the company recognized there's money on the table now, and it would be sort of, it'd almost be foolish in a sense for them not to increase the price to match their competitors, because otherwise people come into the store and go, well, I don't see why, like if it doesn't cost as much as the manufacturer as their competitors, what does that say about the headphone? So, you could say, oh, the 820 should be the same price as the 800S, but you could also say maybe the 800S, where Sennheiser would like to see the pricing, is that the 800S were the same price as the 820, but they couldn't necessarily find a way to make that smooth ramp up in price from the 800 to the 800S to the 820 when they were introducing the models. Or maybe at the time when they released the 800S, they thought that was already quite a high price, and then they realized that the market was actually moving faster than that. And I think the other thing that's happening, as Ofen has suggested, is that there is a huge impact from the East Asian market at this point. Just speaking from the perspective of just working at a headphone store in Australia, which is sort of in the kind of intermediary between the Asia Pacific markets and sort of the Western markets. I think considering the kind of urban density of those territories, where, you know, usually I think if you have a lot of money and you're into headphones, in some Western markets, you have a big house, you have room to play with speakers, right? And so that's where your money's going. But in Asian markets, that's not the case. Even if you have a lot of money, you don't have a great deal of living space. And when you look at, like, when we look at these headphone pricings, when we look at headphone pricing, we think it's quite spectacular at the moment. But when you look at high-end speakers, headphone pricing is nothing. It's
Yeah, that's true.
That's an exceptionally good point.
Yeah, if I was in the same sort of audiophile market, but I just didn't have the room, it wouldn't be quite a stretch for me to pop in. And if I was, you know, if I could afford the grand Utopia speakers, you know, I could afford every single flagship headphone on the market today. Yeah, and I think in general, even when you look at how much more popular earphones seem to be in Asia compared to in, say, the US, because of things like humidity and heat and the available space, and generally speaking, a lot of markets where people don't want to be particularly obtrusive, but they do want something that costs a lot and they do want something that sounds good. So they are prepared to spend multi-kilo bucks on high-end in-ear earphones.
If that is, by the way, I think it's really great to raise the point of, you know, different categories of audio products all sort of possibly following the same trend. I think speakers are a really good indication of where headphones could go in the long term. I just sort of wanted to, if you wouldn't mind, just weave back to where Ofen started us on the used market, because he suggested something that I've kind of subjectively noticed, but I hadn't thought about much. Do we know if there's, you know, I mean, no, but do we have a strong feeling that some high-end headphones hold their used value substantially better than others? Because I think, like, we all agree we'd expect it to drop quite a bit because they're a luxury good, but some of them definitely do seem to me like they hold their value in the used market better than others relative to what they're usually purchased for new. And I'm kind of curious about what that implies.
So, which what are some examples of those headphones that are you talking about that hold their value, you know, comparatively well?
Well, I mean, I think, and it's hard for me to find two that are at exactly the same price point where I've observed this, but, you know, like, I think for a long time, the Sennheiser HD800, you know, for a long time while it was selling for south of $1,200, was still in the used market at maybe $700 or $800. So it was being discounted by maybe 25%, 30%. Simultaneously, you know, you'd see things like LCD2s, I think, around that time were maybe being discounted by maybe 30, 35%. And then when Focal dropped the Utopia, that was in the used market going down by, you know, 40%, 45%. So the question I'm floating here, though, is I can't say I have a market sample here. This is just sort of when I've eyeballed the used listings and been like, ooh, that's interesting. That's what I noticed. But I'm kind of wondering, is it just a bias on my part, or do because some things do definitely, at least to me, seem like they hold their value better than others. But I'm curious as to whether that's just a bias on my part, or if we, you know, if there's any consensus between us on that one.
I think there's some good examples for this. I think actually the Stax, the SR009 is a fairly decent example, because I think it does hold its value a lot better than other flagship headphones. But I think the reason for that is that in a lot of cases you have to import it from Japan, which would drive the price up for some countries, and, you know, definitely decreases availability, which would increase price, or at least, you know, increase demand, and therefore the price that people can take for a used one. But then again, I think what I observed with the Utopia was just a really rapid depreciation on the used market, which it coincided with, you know, discounts on new products, or like new products, that, you know, further push the prices down on this one, even more so, I think, even quicker than the LCD4, which when it first released, I think held its value a little better. I think I saw that selling on the used market for closer to $3,000 maybe than $2,000, which you saw fairly rapidly emerging to be like the direction the Utopia was heading on the used market. But do you have any observations like that, Matt? Metal, I mean, sorry.
Well, although I've known to frequent the used market on some forums, I think I do agree that perhaps you could say that there are some iPhones, to use a phone analogy, of the used market of headphones, aka headphones that hold their value more. I mean, when I bought the HD 800, it was around $975, I think it was. So what Matt is saying is definitely true. It seems to be hovering something between 600 and 800 even to this day. But one other thing that I wanted to interject here is I think that the prices on the used market is also affected by when there are mass drop specials that happen. That can sometimes drive the price down because of the nature of the way that works. I would expect, I actually haven't checked this lately, but I would expect the 650 is probably going for cheaper than it used to as well now. For example, because of the 6XX coming on the mass drop market as well. So I think that may have an impact. But I definitely noticed, I agree with everyone here. I definitely noticed some headphones hold their value better. Exactly why? It seems to be a variety of factors, though.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see what's coming, because there's a lot of stuff coming. Do you guys what's like something that you would be looking forward to in terms of flagship headphones?
In terms of stuff that's announced, or in terms of like potential things that could exist?
Both. Let's say both. One for each.
Oh, Jesus.
All right, then just
toss this to someone else.
No, all right. No. Then just of what's announced.
I'll say, as far as what could potentially be, I'd like to see, because now we have this trend. Whether this is going to happen or not, I don't know, but it would be nice to see, again, more innovation. Now that we have a market. Well, as Matt said, the market probably already existed, but now that the manufacturers are taking advantage of this multi-kilobuck market, I feel like they can easily funnel more money into R&D and maybe come up with some really interesting new stuff that's designed. I mean, for example, Odyssey already takes, I think it's 2 weeks or something like that, 2.5 weeks to make the drivers, or the diaphragms, more particular, I believe, on the LCD4, because it's so thin. So because that headphone is $4,000, they can get away with things like that. And I'd like to see, if we're gonna keep going in this in this direction in terms of price, it'd be great to see additional innovation follow with it. So I guess we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Definitely would like to see more innovation, different things, especially in the closed spec market. But
Go ahead. Having had a moment to reconstruct my thoughts there, sorry, I wasn't expecting such a hot one there.
My bad.
I think that in sort of the direct thing, the stuff that is announced that we're excited about, I'm actually kind of interested in, I don't know, I guess I would call it, sort of the accessories that are useful to headphones, that are like, specifically the thing I'm thinking about here is something that doesn't really have a category yet, but the Smith Realizer. It's not in itself a flagship headphone, but I don't think you'd probably pair a now $4,000 DAC amp with DSP with something that's not a flagship headphone typically. And I think that sort of stuff like that's taking advantage of the amount that people are apparently willing to pay and are able to pay and are happy to pay for good quality, is what's really kind of exciting to me. The potential for a lot of avenues of research that just wouldn't have been viable in a time when people are going to only pay a maximum of $200-300 for headphones. There's just some routes you can't go down. And I think if speakers are any example, and I think Lachlan made a very good point earlier, they make a very good comparison point. we're going to keep seeing, as prices rise and as the high end market fills out, to distinct themselves, manufacturers are going to be having to do a lot of really interesting research, which hopefully will ultimately become available to all of us as consumers in things. I'm personally really excited about digital signal processing and headphone personalization, but that's just one dimension. We're also seeing things like the return of free field headphones, like the Austrians' MySphere, which I think was not viable for a long time, or at least wasn't seen as viable for a long time. But that sort of stuff, people who are willing to push the limits and who have now the budget to take the risk to do so, is what I'm really quite excited about.
I want to add to what Matt said by saying that I think that with all this research that's now becoming viable, I'd like to see some of this technology potentially trickle down, you could say, into the mid-fi offerings, for example, because the company is able to do independent research and advance just their technology as a whole. So, for example, instead of built to a price, built to whatever they can do. And because they're able to do that at the high end, then they can use some of that technology, to bring that down in price. And that would be something that I'm also looking forward to.
Yeah, anything that you're looking forward to in particular, Lachlan?
Well, and I should probably point out, because it's funny that this hasn't come up, considering how common this theme is, but I should probably point out that a lot of people sort of don't regard this trend in pricing as a positive thing. Like, well, a lot of people feel very negative about it, and in a way, you could say, it's a bit like, on the one hand, it's a bit like complaining that Ferraris are too expensive or something like that. But I think it really depends on whether or not people see that there is that trickle down, as Metal was saying, that trickle down effect where you have innovations that are first market tested in sort of the flagship Halo products, where price is no object, and then they sort of become mass commercialized in the cheaper models. I think that the exciting trend for me is, as Matt is suggesting, with sort of wireless or DSP enabled headphones, and it seems to be the thing that the two go hand in hand, where you have the wireless, and because you have the inbuilt the Bluetooth module and the inbuilt amplifier in the headphone, then you may as well do a DSP, because you could tune it better. And I'm really interested to see whether or not does that become the dominant trend, or will it always be the case that there will be the people who are really into high-end headphones are going to be purists, and they're never going to want that DSP, and they're never going to accept a multi-kilobuck headphone that has that kind of technology. And I think the sort of interesting comparison is with speakers, where we have the super high-end exotic speakers, and then we have Sonos, which is the sort of mass consumer, but sort of high quality mass consumer option, which I would equate with where we're seeing sort of wireless headphones move. And I think one of the interesting examples also is the Beyerdynamic Amaran wireless, where you have that wireless headphone and you run through a little app and it does a little listening test, and then it produces a sound profile that saves to the headphone. And I think that I mean, it's not a perfect headphone, but I think it points a way towards whether or not we'll start seeing headphones that cost several $1,000s that have all those DSP kind of whiz bang effects. So that's I'm not necessarily keen on myself personally buying one of those. Maybe I'm a bit of a purist that way, but I am really keen to see whether the market does move in that direction.
Something coming from speakers that I'm kind of interested to see if an analog evolves to is, in speakers we have high-end, very premium, very exotic passive speakers, and we have, consumer-oriented wireless and other, Sonos equivalent speakers. But there's also a lot of studio monitors that are active speakers or even DSP equipped that sort of exist both as high-end, targeted to high-end listening and high fidelity, directly, and also incorporate a lot of technologies. In headphones, the only analogs I can think to that are the Sonoma Model 1 and the AKG N90Q, because those are the only two explicitly audiophile targeted headphones I know that had DSP. And I'm not sure how successful they've been, but I think that everyone's kind of going to be watching that sort of thing, because the potential there is really exciting from the manufacturer's standpoint. Being able to have both the cost as no object design and the ability to play with all the technologies without worrying as much about purism. I think it'll be interesting to see if that sort of niche develops in headphones as well.
I want to jump in here and also bring up to that point. I've had people come in who are music producers, and they mentioned very specifically that they want an Odyssey because of SonarWorks, where the manufacturers are releasing profiles that hook into the I don't exactly know how it works. I never tried it myself, but it's a DSP that you run on your computer that applies to the headphone, and it's
so is it SonarWorks or Reveal? Because SonarWorks
has a Reveal plugin as well that is designed to equalize each headphone to supposedly a similar target curve. But yeah, both of those are pretty much the same technology.
Well, SonarWorks does some pretty unique and interesting things. Probably the most interesting being that, of course, SonarWorks isn't affiliated with the manufacturers. They're their own company, kind of like Smith, sort of, who are selling DSP correction. Whereas Odyssey, I think, is one of the few manufacturers who are in-house saying, here's how you can DSP our headphones.
Oh, is that in-house? I never realized.
Odyssey has Reveal in-house, and SonarWorks, who are out of house and correct a lot of headphones, including Odysseys.
Okay.
And of course, Odyssey also has Cypher. I can't believe that I forgot about that, but they've been increasingly hard.
I was going to bring up the LCD i4 as an interesting example of what we're talking about. And even the iSigns as well, same idea. I believe, I don't know if Odyssey actually advertises this, but at least Tile had talked about when he reviewed the iSign that it's optimized for, I believe they said THD instead of frequency response. And so instead of giving it a perfect FR, they are designed to be used with an EQ, which is provided or just DSP in general. It may just be an EQ, might be something else in addition to that. But anyway, and that gets you to the target that they're intending. So it's interesting to see people taking that approach as well. That's different.
Yeah, lots of new technology being developed in many branches of this industry. Definitely, DSP is one thing that is going to be one thing everybody's looking at is going to be looking at, because there's a good chance that DSP is going to be what will be used in most products going on from now, when it has been perfected and maybe scaled down to a low enough price where they can apply it to more products and actually make it cost effective and more price points, different tiers of headphones, different, maybe even flagships, more flagships than just the Sonoma or maybe the LCD i4, which are maybe the only two DSP flagships that I can think of right now, at least.
And 90Q also.
Oh yeah, and then 90Q. Yeah, always forget about that one. But
I think most people do, sadly.
yeah, it's kind of a lost child of the flagship headphone world, actually. Yeah, but it's an interesting headphone nonetheless, and I'm glad that Tal covered it when he did.
Me too.
And I do want to hear one, but they don't seem to sell that well, it seems. I'm not completely sure. I don't know any numbers, so I don't want to say for sure, but I haven't seen many of them in a while, to be quite honest.
I have actually heard one. I'll just say briefly, the ear correction that it seems to have that measures, I guess, the frequency response of your pinna. Maybe Matt knows more about what they're actually doing, but this technology is also in the Elite, the Everest Elite 700, and probably in the newer ones from that line as well. But it sounded pretty flat to me, really like Harmon E, but without the bass boost part of it, which was pretty interesting. And if I calibrated it on my leg or something totally different, then the frequency response was completely different. So it's an interesting product.
But did you try putting it on backwards and having it calibrate to your ears backwards?
I did not try that. And then turn it back around.
Possibilities. Infinite possibilities. You can tune into anything you'd like.
Right.
All right, so, well, we've established that. Thank you for listening to the Headphone Dialogue Episode 2. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we upload new content. If you want to discuss this topic and more, you can join our Discord server by clicking the link in the description box below. Until next time, happy listening.